Hello, everyone. Welcome. Bienvenidos a todos. I'm Carl Brook, and I direct international programs at the Environmental Law Institute. Welcome, everyone. Before I make a few opening remarks, Janari, do you want to make an announcement regarding interpretation in Spanish?
A todos los que se han ido uniendo.
Yes, those of you who have joined the meeting, at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you'll find an interpretation icon. It looks like a globe. Please click on it and then go to the Spanish channel or English channel accordingly so you may listen to simultaneous interpretation.
Excellent, thank you. And so Jamie and Lisa, if you would like English interpretation, at the bottom there is the interpretation icon, the globe, and you can choose English or Spanish as you prefer. This is part of our second policy dialogue, which is a series of discussions between the judiciary, academics, prosecutors, and civil society on improving and addressing illegal deforestation in Colombia. And we have had, this is the second of a series of webinars that we are having on this topic. The first one addressed the new environmental crimes bill in Colombia, and the next one will be in 1 week, and that is going to be on some procedural aspects that are happening in Colombia related to the administration of justice. Today, we're going to be focusing particularly on the role of law clinics in representing communities as they seek to protect their environmental interests. We are honored to have representatives from leading clinics in both the United States and Colombia, and we will be having a dialogue. Luis Felipe Guzman will be moderating the session. I just wanted to welcome you all and to provide a little of the broader context. We have, as part of the broader project, an effort to train judges across the Colombian Amazon. And this has to do with many of the practical aspects. And we're hoping that today's dialogue can also focus on what have people learned, what are people struggling with, how can we improve the effective representation of communities through law clinics. With that, I'll turn it over to Luis Felipe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carl. So let's get started. I'm going to introduce the methodology that we're going to be applying to our webinar. Is the role of legal clinics in judicial processes and in environmental processes. Especially, we're going to be here from 4 in the afternoon, Colombian time, till 6 in the afternoon. It's in the framework of this second webinar and this second dialogue on policy transforming deforestation in Colombia. We're going to approach the role that legal clinics have played in environmental, judicial, or legal processes through a fluid dialogue between legal clinics in the US and legal clinics in Colombia. It's very well known, this clinical method in several countries such as the US, Australia, South Africa, the UK, amongst others. And it is based on the study of this methodology that the investigator or the judiciary can have that ideal transit from the dogmatic world into the legal reality, where, of course, in environmental matters, we see a rise of legal issues and they all deserve an approach and a solution. We'll hear the intervention from Mauricio Madrigal, director of the Environmental Legal Clinic of Andes University in Colombia. Also, the presentation by Lisa Jordan, the director of the Legal Clinic Tulane Environmental Law Clinic.
También vamos a tener la intervención
We'll
de la
also
profesora
be
Erika
listening to
Castro
Erika
Buitrago,
Castro
directora de la
Buitrago,
Clínica Jurídica
Director of
Ambiental
the
de la
Environmental
Universidad de Medellín.
Legal Clinic in Medellin, and of course, in this dialogue between the US and the Colombian clinics, we'll have the intervention from James So from, I understand, Carlos School. And then finally, we'll listen to a legal clinic that is not adjoined to any university, but in the Colombian case has played a very important role, such as justice. We're going to be listening to Laura Santa Coloma with the judicial. I'm sorry. Sorry, someone opened the microphone, especially the innovation in justice. In some cases, there will not cases such as the Amazon ruling. The methodology that we'll be using, panelists and attendees, is as follows. We will give some initial time. There'll be 10 minutes to each panelist. The panelists have names so that they make their initial presentation in the order that I'll be introducing them. Then we'll have some 45 minutes to have a dialogue and then a discussion to respond to some guiding questions that were prepared by the team. At the end, we'll draw some conclusions and of course, some additional tools that we've identified in the Colombian scenario, specifically through an observatory of the environmental law and research, the project at External Columbia University. That'll be the methodology. We intend to make sure that in these initial 10 minutes for each speaker, you may introduce yourself and describe your clinic, your legal clinic. The idea is a little bit to hear about the trajectory, background, how long it's been working, the main cases, the barriers of intervention, and then we'll continue with a dialogue based on the guiding questions, as I said before. Okay, no further ado, let's begin with the dialogue of this second webinar, the role of legal clinics in environmental legal processes within the framework of the second dialogue on policy transforming deforestation in Colombia. So we welcome Professor Mauricio Madrigal for his presentation in 10 minutes. Thank you very much, Luis Felipe. I'm very pleased to join you here today. We believe it's necessary, it's key. It's true that these dialogues are very enriching and always, as we say, we are always eager to learn and to improve. And these dialogues, of course, without barriers, it's nice to be able to converse and improve in favor of our students and process. I'm going to share a short presentation of our clinic. Please let me know if you can see it. I hope so. Yes, we can see it. Go ahead. I'd like to approach three big topics: the overview of our clinic, specific view that we have in our clinic, in our legal clinic, of the public interest litigation that we call an ethical cycle beyond the strategic, and some main achievements that we have attained in these 1.5 years of the pandemic, the main challenges that have been implemented in St. Paul University. In very general terms, I should start by pointing out that our clinic, the Clinical Health and Environmental Public Clinic, legal clinic in the Andes University, started 5 years ago. We've been there for 5 years. Our main block, as I said, is the public interest litigation. It means we are a clinic to defend public interest and also human rights. And there we anchor the competencies and the skills of our students. We have three big dimensions. There's another open microphone. We different, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear. Yeah. In case of our clinic, because I know there are differences at our clinic, we anchor the legal practice, the internship of our students. I mean, our students are part of this legal office of Andes University. They have a 1-year internship, continuous. There's no a vacation period, and it's equal to 4 academic credits. in their studies. We provide support to each group that I'll be explaining later. These are some kind of advisory groups, and every week we also hold general meetings. Our structure and composition is the directorate office that I lead, then legal support, 14 students from the law school, 6 research assistants from engineering, environmental engineering, I mean, biology, design, and medicine. And for this period, we have an assistant from, research assistant from the Organization of Indigenous Peoples from the Amazon. We've have a alliance, a partnership with OPIAC, and they're part of a clinic, and 7 associate professors from different majors. This is just to show the people in the clinic. That's all of us. It's 20 people. We're working in favor of the public interest, and we combine, as I said, one of the key work lines, that is the interdisciplines. As I said, there are students from biology, environmental, engineering, design, medicine, all of them involved with our clinic. These are some of our cases. We look at macro cases in the case of territories, for example. As you can see, we have 4 theme groups, territories, for example, Santa Marta Basin, Santurban, Páramo, um, power plants, the environment, to ban fracking, the schedule agreement. Is key to our talk. We are applying it. We'll produce a report in about a month's time. We're applying some standards of access to information. Also, deforestation, about a month's time, we'll be publishing the results of that report. We're also in the case of a Tribuga port case. Now in environmental health, look at the clinic, climate justice. Here we have 2 cases in environmental health at the constitutional level. One of the hurricane in Providence, we they are hoping they declare forest displacement because of climate change, another one because of contaminated pollution with mercury in Colombian zone. Those 2 cases are at the constitutional court level. The public health group, we have 1 case in medications at the state council. There's another case in the right to water, and the case that is following a sentence because of the intercultural health in Valpes department. It's one of the departments of Amazon. It's all kind of all genders, all the cases that I've discussed must be questioned, and as much as possible integrate the gender approach. That's how our litigation plans start as well. Moving on with this context, after showing this overview of our proposal and what we've been doing is clinical teaching always in cooperation. These are not exclusive ideas. On the contrary, these are collective constructions with other clinics, as we'll be discussing later. We have our public interest litigation models based on moments and components. These moments and components are completely flexible. They relate to one another. They're cyclical. I mean, we start with a diagnosis and then we begin to implement the political or investigation strategy, and we can go back depending on how the case flows. It is flexible that we can go back and make adjustments, and that's why we call it the dialogic litigation. Of course, there are some guiding questions. It has a big academic foundation. We've built it with all the students of the clinic. The key point is the identification of selection of cases. We have 2 big ways, and an inductive one. We receive external requests, of course, or our own cases. There, in those external requests, or in our own cases, we apply an assembly method to make decisions, to measure our capabilities, and to know who takes on leadership. And of course, after a research or investigation process, just as we do with the schedule agreement and deforestation, or with energy transition and human rights, then we create new cases. We create new lines. Always the legal actions will be our last instrument. We act in favor of the public interest. We defend that. We believe we have very inner values, union force, listen to the communities, because we work with and for communities. That's going to be the clear and specific line, how to characterize public interest based on the defense of those communities and those groups, social groups that have been empowered, have not been empowered. And that's where the key core of public interest. We've also strengthened, this is another action I want to highlight because it's pretty recent in this research line and provide very deep foundation. We've created some lab in human rights and environmental right. Very strategic lines. It's an important area to the extent that the lab becomes or turns into two big pillars or strategies of the clinic. On the one hand, it trains students to access the clinic. It's kind of previous point of research and participatory in the research. Students from previous semester, they're not in their internship anymore. They get to see the clinic and they might join some of the cases or to their graduation paper. And then to conclude, I think I'm doing okay with time. Yeah. I think it's about 8 minutes. There's let's say a view about the main achievements in these 1.5 years. In judicial matters, we have had 5 interventions before high courts. We have helped 4 of those, and we have followed up on 3 important sentences in our country. The Atrato River as a subject of rights, also the Amazon as a subject of rights, and the cultural system of health in Vaupes. We have 7 advocacy processes in public policy. We must highlight the declaration of a emergency, health emergency in Bogota. We got together to have this approach on human rights. And another important component is the social investigation and appropriation because it's the foundation for everything, the advocacy and everything else. So it's 34 events that we've held, thesis, there's a book, but I'd like to highlight, I'm sorry, to promote this, our podcast, Voices from the Land, with this radio novella for some communities in Choco. So it's very interesting with the community councils and with several community radios from Choco and Maki, speaking about access to information, participation, and access to justice. I should also mention that all of this, I mean, it's just a guide. These are achievements from students. It's our cooperation processes, and it's just bringing knowledge together. It's not only the director or this or that, it's these students that advocacy, influence, participation, interventions is by students. Thank you very much and have a great time. Thank you, Mauricio. Very strict with time. Thank you. Thank you for being so careful with the time. Now we're going to listen to Lisa Jordan, who will also tell us about from you, her experience, of course, the role of the legal clinic she leads. But before I give her the floor, we invite all the attendees so that in the chat, they can start writing these questions and concerns for the space we will have at the end of the interventions from each panelist. Okay, so go ahead, Lisa.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, I'm going to go ahead also and share my screen. Okay, so our clinic is the Tulane Environmental Law Clinic. Again, I'm Lisa Jordan, the director. I was very interested to hear the last presentation because there are a lot of similarities between that clinic and ours, but some differences as well. So I'd also like to give y'all some background on our clinic. We have been around for over 30 years. We were established in 1989, and we are a program of the law school of Tulane University School of Law. So we're physically within the law school building, and all of our attorneys in the clinic are faculty at the law school. We have 3 main purposes. The first one is to train law students to be ethical and effective lawyers. by guiding law students through actual client representation. Two, to represent individuals and groups on public interest environmental issues. And we focus on clients who would not otherwise have the ability to afford legal representation. So we thereby expand access to the legal system for them. And three, we bolster community members' capacity to directly participate themselves effectively in decisions about environmental issues. So our students, unlike the other clinic, our students are all law students. I love the idea of having various expertise among students, but we're all law students here in our clinic. We have students who are either in their second half of their second year of law school or in their third year of law school, which is the last year of law school. And we usually have somewhere between 20 and 25 students working in our clinic at any given time. I wish I had brought pictures of our students as well, but I didn't. So our students are allowed to practice law, even though they are not licensed lawyers, under the very careful supervision of one or more licensed attorneys. And that is allowed under our Louisiana Supreme Court rule that allows students to actually represent clients, again, under the close supervision of licensed attorneys. So without that Louisiana Supreme Court rule, our students would not be able to do what they do. But our model is that our students learn by doing. They are the lead on the case. They have a client or clients, as well as, of course, the supervising attorneys also have the clients. But students do the work. The students take the lead. If we have a hearing in court, the student argues the case. If we have a written brief to write, then the student takes the lead in writing it. So they're not research assistants. And when I say that, I don't mean that they don't have to do research, because all lawyers have to do research, but they don't take the role of someone that takes orders, does research, and hands it back. They're actually working, they're taking on the case as their own. Our clinic has, in addition to myself, the clinic director, we have 3 licensed attorneys who are experienced in environmental law, who oversee the students' work and also represent the clients. As I said, those attorneys are faculty at the law school. And it's necessary to have a lot of attorneys because it's very careful supervision of the students. We also have a community engagement program that's somewhat unique for environmental law clinics in the United States to have this position. We've had it since we started. And the program is generally a non-lawyer that heads the program. And they both serve as intake. So they take in requests from clients for legal representation. But the program goes beyond that, because there are many cases and clients who we simply cannot take on because we get more requests for representation by far than we have the capacity to handle. So in that instance, rather than simply turning the person or the group away, our community engagement program can help them advocate for themselves. And so that works really well, and also serve as a liaison, a connection between the lawyers and the clients. Once we take the case, then the lawyers will directly communicate with the clients. But as was described before, we often go through an investigatory phase when a client comes to us to see whether we think there's something legal that we can do for them. And then we also have a staff scientist. And this has been a fairly recent, we have had staff scientists in our early years, but lately we had not had one for about the last 15, 20 years, actually. And so now we have a staff scientist again, and it's been a very, very valuable addition to the clinic to have someone on staff that can not only advise the lawyers and the student lawyers about technical matters, but that can, again, directly engage with the community and provide them scientific information that they can use themselves. Our staff scientist happens to be also the director of our community engagement program. So she serves two roles, and she has a staff person that works in her program also with clients. We've recently introduced a notice. We provide early notice to groups that sign up for it. And it's to basically make sure that the community finds out as early as possible about something that is coming their way, perhaps an industrial facility that's going to pollute their air and they don't want it. We have found, this is one of the, sort of trajectories, if you will, that we've realized is very important to success, is to find out as early as possible that something's coming so that the community can engage immediately and the legal and the lawyers can engage immediately. And then we also have an administrative secretary. So our model in terms of our cases and clients, we handle public interest work. And so we do not handle cases where the client is seeking money damages. For example, if there was an explosion or a leak or something, often people need compensation, monetary compensation, but we don't handle those cases, largely because there's a private bar, private attorneys who will pick up that kind of work. And we're here to do work that other attorneys don't do. So many of our cases are litigating against industrial facilities that are either existing already or are proposing to come to an area. If it's an existing facility, our laws allow us to file a citizen suit. And basically that means that citizens can enforce the federal environmental laws directly if the federal agencies aren't doing their job, or state agencies, then citizens can enforce the law. So we can sue companies that are exceeding their permitted levels of pollution or are polluting without a permit. The other big types of cases that we handle are suing federal and state agencies who are responsible for protecting the public health and often fail at that job. And so we often sue them, again, on behalf of our clients, and also engage at the local government level, so the parish level. We do not, similar to what the last speaker said, the clinic does not have an independent agenda. We don't have a political agenda. We don't have an environmentalist agenda. It's the clients who tell us what they want. The clients dictate the goals of the litigation. Very important, as was just said, that the clients are the ones, and we serve them. We don't come in with preconceived ideas about what they should want or what they're trying to achieve. And they come to us, as I said, through the community engagement director. We handle lots of different environmental cases: land contamination and pollution, water pollution, air pollution, wetlands preservation, endangered species, pretty much runs the gamut. And we focus on what we call environmental justice communities, which are communities of color or low income that are disproportionately impacted by pollution. They have more pollution than other communities. Last slide is just to talk for a second about controversy. So in the state that we operate in, Louisiana, the oil and gas industry and the petrochemical industry is very powerful. And so we are suing those industries often, and that often causes them to be unhappy and to try to exert political pressure to limit us, or in some instances, shut us down. And we had two, sort of big fights along those lines. One in 1999, after we were successful in stopping a large polyvinyl chloride plant from locating in an environmental justice community. And then in 2010, the Louisiana legislature tried to pass a bill that would prevent us from doing most of what we do. But those efforts were ultimately not successful. So thank you very much. I think I'm at or over my time. I appreciate y'all's attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Lisa Jordan. It is very interesting what you just shared. Now we go to Erika Castro Buitrago, teacher, who will also have up to 10 minutes for her presentation about the Environmental Legal Clinic of Medellin University in Colombia. Dr. Castro Buitrago, good afternoon. You're welcome. Hello, good afternoon. I would like to make sure that you can hear me. Yes, we can hear you well, and we can see your presentation. Please go on. Well, talk about the experience of the legal clinic of public interest of the University of Medellin. I am also going to give you some background. Our history began in 2004 when we created the legal clinic in Medellin. This was the second legal clinic in the country. We have been in business for 17 years, and precisely when we began with the matters of environmental conflicts and related to the violation of human rights, especially the legal clinic focused on the work with the nearby communities to the University of Medellin. We are in an area of urban expansion in the boundaries with one of the townships, one of the rural areas of Medellin. And because of the characteristics of the city, because of the geography and the economic activities, we have an important number of environmental matters to take care, and also conflicts that, thanks to what happened with the pandemic, with the declaration of the health emergency, they have escalated. Our first intention when we created the legal clinic first was to work with real cases and to take care of the nearby community, meaning in the neighborhood, in the township, and in the city that would have problems or related to the human rights violation, and that we could take care of those topics, especially within the framework of environmental matters. This clinic has something that is very interesting, which is, in its 17 years, the greater satisfaction that we have had is that it has promoted the creation of new university legal clinics in the city. With the implementation of this clinic, the alumni are the teachers now, or the faculty or consultants of legal clinics in the city. So we have been able to create a university network of clinics. All of them come from the University of Medellin, and even we have had the possibility of faculty that studied in the clinics or they got trained. They could be consultants and faculty in other universities. That is one of the biggest achievements of the clinics, which is to promote teaching clinics in other universities by means of the training of students as facilitators of clinical teaching as well. Something very interesting during these 17 years to highlight is that their alumni, besides faculty or investigators or researchers, they are also judges. They are also entrepreneurs and consultants. Most of them are public servants, faculty, investigators, and judges. That means that the legal clinic with the public interest issues and human rights issues has achieved a great transformation in its students. Well, those are some pictures of our dear and alumni, and with the role of students. Two objectives move us in the legal clinic of public interest. One is to teach law by means of the real proceedings, real cases, and also to give a context even for the teachers who are with us from United States. In Colombia, it is possible thanks to constitutional changes of 1991, where for the first time, actions were established that would allow us, to any citizen go before a judge, before the courts to discuss matters of collective rights or fundamental rights without having the representation of an attorney. In a very special case of the legal clinics, even from the beginnings by mid-99, we found that the law 472 of 1998 that regulated popular action suits, there were promotion for faculty and students to constitute a sort of study groups on collective rights with the new Declaration of Rights that we had thanks to the new Constitution of 1991, and on the possibilities of Law 472 of 1998 begin litigation without the need of the representation of an attorney or a lawyer that would have the license to be able to practice law. And we could say today that defense of collective human rights, and especially from a innovative perspective on the protection of nature, we are bringing it forth thanks to the evolution, innovation of the constitutional jurisprudence in environmental matters. So we teach law by means of real cases with a particular perspective on law. We do not have a traditional perspective of law, since we, in this case, also have a clear intentions of being critical of having that encyclopedic teaching that for many years the law schools had in the country. And with us, there is another objective, is to promote greater and better access to environmental justice. I would like to say also that the clinic has working not only on environmental matters, but also the rights of women, especially on the representation of minorities, the matter of the right to health, and a very innovative clinic that at this moment was created on theory of law, which basically would test the practice of the theory of law. So in that case, to us as a clinic, as teachers, as students, we are moved by two key intentions, which are to promote a quality teaching. Of course, the clinic is going to have the first intention to be able to achieve that a student is committed with the public interest causes, with the defense of human rights, with an understanding of the environmental matters, but also thinking that that student in the future is going to be a lawyer with a clear awareness on social justice. From there is that one of our sources of pride is that our alumni, we understand, and they have this sensitivity, and from there the profiles that we have, such as judges, as public servants, and even it is very nice to identify alumni creating their own companies or their own firms. They have pro bono work. So strategic litigation is also a strategy for that teaching. And next to strategic litigation, we have our work method. I would like to say that with all these years of working in the legal clinic, we were able to have important research on our methodology. And with that methodology, we could say that we were able, as Mauricio was saying, to build together how our work was, reflecting on it and make it, systematize it. From there, our investigation method has an emphasis. Our work method has an emphasis on research, and these are our stages.
To explore and have hypotheses and plan what we call strategic litigation. And in that case, what it means, evaluating and supporting the follow-up to the case. Okay, well, to continue, with those objectives, we identify that one case may be handled from different scenarios, and we can combine different strategies based on that methodology. So we can establish that a case in particular can get a solution from the juridical viewpoint so that we can have greater access to justice by a process that takes to innovation from the judge viewpoint, or probably that case actually requires to be more visible in the public agenda so that there can be plans, projects, or even public policies, and juridical clinics can actually support that, legal clinics. So we could be talking about a legislative perspective, and this is what we see legal development. So in all that, we have always had this objective. The objective is to have special collaboration along with communities or with users that are there with us. And the clinic will always have this overarching work, education, strengthen organizations, so that they can have this work with networks so that it is strengthened, acknowledging the right to healthy environments. We use the media and we use social networks, and that's a strategy, an overarching strategy. I believe, and I see that my time is up, what I wanted to portray here is that we have two important objectives. One of them is to have successful cases, having better protection, having visibility that they cannot be in public agenda. However, we know we are a university. Our first objective is pedagogy, to train citizens as mediators for social justice. When the Q&A comes, we can talk about cases and their experiences. Thank you so much. Thank you, Erica, so much for your presentation. Okay, now we are going to listen to Professor Jim. He will also have 10 minutes for the clinic. Hello, Professor James, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, and thank you. I'm happy to be here. Can everybody see my presentation on the screen? Great. Well, I'm Jamie Saul. I'm an attorney and clinical professor at Earthrise Law Center. We're the environmental litigation clinic at Lewis and Clark Law School in Portland, Oregon. And I'm going to begin by giving you just a very quick overview of our clinic and its structure. It's quite similar to the Tulane clinic that we heard about from Lisa. So the bulk of my presentation, I want to show you some pictures using some of our previous cases, just to give you a sense of the kind of work that we do and the way that we feel we contribute to the environmental movement here in the United States. So we are a litigation clinic. Unlike some other clinics, we don't do a lot of administrative advocacy or public advocacy. We almost exclusively litigate in federal court. We occasionally will dabble in state court proceedings here in Oregon. We were founded in 1996, and we are celebrating our 25th anniversary this year. Like most other clinics, our primary function is, of course, the education of our students. And for us, our students enroll in the clinic for a full academic year. They get 8 credits for it, and they contribute usually between 12 and 15 hours per week working on clinic matters. So they continue to have other coursework at the same time. We are housed on the campus of Lewis and Clark Law School, but we do handle cases nationwide. We actually have a staff attorney who works out of his house in Boston, Massachusetts, the far other side of the country. And at this point, we've handled cases in over 20 US states so far. Several years ago, we opened a fellowship program, a postgraduate fellowship program. And so for about the past 5 or 6 years, we have employed a recent law school graduate to work with us for a 2-year limited term fellowship. And we like that as an opportunity to provide that young professional an opportunity to build their legal expertise with a couple more years of education and experience before sending them out into the world. And Lewis and Clark Law School has itself been around for over 100 years. We have a pretty old and fairly well-established environmental law program at this point. And one of the greatest indicators of our success is just seeing how many of our graduates are out working in public interest environmental law, not only here on the West Coast of the United States, but around the country and indeed throughout the world. We do work in all areas of American environmental law, although we tend to focus on 4 main sub areas, including water quality, air quality, public lands management, and endangered species protection. And our current staff is pretty large. We currently have 3 clinical professors on staff. We have 2 staff attorneys who are not on the faculty. We have our 2 legal fellows, and we have a support staff of 2. And this year we have 25 students enrolled in our clinic, which we are thrilled about. So I'm going to move on and show you just a few of our cases here with some pictures as well. This is a case that involved the protection of salt ponds in San Francisco Bay. These salt ponds that you can see in the middle of this picture were converted from historic wetlands on the bay. And our client, who is San Francisco Bay Keeper, wanted to protect these salt ponds and prevent the development of a massive apartment and retail complex in the salt ponds. Our clients felt that the wetlands play an important role in providing wildlife habitat and also an important barrier for rising seas due to climate change. And in this case, we successfully overturned a decision by the United States Environmental Protection Agency, which had found that these wetlands were not protected by the Clean Water Act. And we are optimistic that as a result of this case, these wetlands will be permanently protected and the development proposal will be abandoned. And in these examples, this one and the others I have going forward, what I want to do is try to highlight that not only are we trying to protect the local interests of the community who's directly affected by the resource, and in this case, it was water quality advocates and recreational users of the San Francisco Bay, but there's almost always a secondary and broader purpose of our litigation, and that is to contribute in some way to the broader environmental movement by bringing about some kind of change as to how our resources are protected and managed. And so at issue in this case in the San Francisco Bay was an interpretation of the Federal Clean Water Act. And our court decision successfully overturned a prior interpretation of the act that had been in place under the President Trump administration in a way that we think will expand Clean Water Act protections of similar resources around the country going forward. Here's another case, a recent case that sought to protect public lands around Mount St. Helens in Washington State from exploration for mining. There's a mineral-rich area near Mount St. Helens National Volcanic Monument. And in this case, the Forest Service had issued some permits to allow exploration within the area. And we sought to challenge that decision by the Forest Service under the United States National Environmental Protection Act and some other laws. And here, of course, we had advocates, recreational users of the area. It's a wonderful area for hiking and backpacking. And we wanted to protect their interests and help safeguard this beautiful area of the country. But the broader implication here is that we are also trying to influence the way our government authorizes mining and issues mining and exploration permits on public lands in particular. And we think we advanced the ball a little bit on that point. We had this particular mining permit was overturned by a court in Washington State, and the decision was sent back to the Forest Service for, excuse me, it's actually the Bureau of Land Management here. It was sent back to the government for further environmental scrutiny. This is a picture for a case that is actually still ongoing here in Southern Oregon. We are challenging, actually suing a city of Oregon for violating the Federal Clean Water Act when it discharges pollution from its municipal wastewater treatment plant that you can see here in the picture into the Rogue River. The Rogue River in Southern Oregon is a beautiful river. It's protected under our Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, and it provides important habitat for salmon and other species. We were brought to this case by a group of local residents who wanted to protect the river. Many of them fished and paddled boats and canoes on the river, and they were concerned about the pollution. And we are litigating to protect their interests in this particular water. But the broader issue implicated by this case is the regulation of nutrient pollution, which is a major issue in Oregon and throughout the United States. Nutrient pollution, nitrogen and phosphorus from farm fields and municipal discharges like this one is causing widespread devastation to our surface waters around the country. And through this case, we're trying to force this particular facility and hopefully future facilities as well to do a better job of cleaning up their pollution and reducing the nutrient pollution that they discharge into our rivers and streams. Here is a case that is in fact about logging. This is a picture of Walton Lake in Central Oregon. And in this case, we were challenging a decision by the United States Forest Service to authorize logging on about 168 acres of national forest land around the lake. This was a popular destination for camping, picnicking, backpacking, mountain biking, etc. And we were brought to this case by a group of forest advocates and recreational users of the national forest who wanted to protect this particular area from deforestation so that it remained beautiful and enjoyable for years to come. But the broader implication is trying to affect the way the Forest Service allows logging on public lands. Our national forests are by law a kind of multiple use resource. A certain amount of logging is permitted, but our clients tend to view that logging is very often allowed in places where it should not be allowed and at rates that should not be allowed and that are not sustainable. So we're trying to affect the way the Forest Service authorizes logging on public lands through this case. This particular logging project, we've stopped it twice, but we are now back in court for a third time. The Forest Service just won't let this project go away. So we'll keep fighting them at every turn. And I think this is my last example. This is from about 10 years ago. And this shows a picture of the coal-fired powered plant in Eastern Oregon operated by our regional electric utility called Portland General Electric. This, fortunately, thanks to our litigation, this coal plant has now been closed. At the time, this was the only coal-fired power plant in the state of Oregon. Other parts of the country, of course, still have many, many coal-fired power plants that are still in operation. The real issue here, we represented the Sierra Club in this case. And for a long time, I think still currently, the Sierra Club had a large and systematic approach to trying to shut down coal plants around the country in order to speed the development of cleaner, sources of electricity like wind and gas. The local benefits, of course, I'm sure many on this webinar are familiar. Coal-fired power plants are terrible emitters of air pollution, particulate matter, and other pollutants that are horrible for public health and a detriment to visibility. So we have, again, both a local benefit to improving public health and visibility around the plant, but also the broader national and even international implication of climate change that we're trying to address one facility at a time by bringing lawsuits like this against coal-fired power plants. I think that's the last slide I have. So thanks very much for your time. I look forward to any questions that you might have a little bit later.
Thank you so much, James, for your presentation. We're going to continue now with Laura Santa Coloma. She will introduce to us the role of NGOs with this special view to the intervention of the Amazon ruling. Hello, Laura. You are welcome. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I wanted to start by telling you that De Justicia is a research center. It's a thought center that has 3 lines. The methodology, the research methodology is based on 3 lines. So we research, we prepare academic documents, and with those documents, we aim at having advocacy in different organizations, different networks, but from a legal viewpoint. So that's our action line. We try to have judicial interventions, lawsuits. We accompany different litigations in terms of human rights. So the Justicia is an organization whose emphasis is not only environmental, like this panel is about, but this also is broader, of course. So we have this line for drugs, a line for peasants, a line for the judicial system, transitional justice, the international line, regionalization. There are multiple lines from which human rights are addressed. The Justicia has been on for 15 years since its foundation, and we work, almost all of us are lawyers, but there are other colleagues like political scientists, anthropologists, sociologists. We even have a biologist. So we see that we have professionals from different areas. This makes our work so interesting. So we have this line for transparency as well, and technology as well. So we had an engineer as well. So the Justicia has aimed its work on human rights, but assuming challenges that science and technology brings and the global context, so that those human rights evolve. So today, they asked me to tell you about this case for this STC 4360 on the Amazon ruling. So from the Supreme Court of Justice in 2018, and I wanted to tell you a little bit about the problem so that we contextualize everyone. So we have a very serious deforestation problem in the country, but at the global level, we also have a problem related with climate change. And how are they related? So every time there is lagging, carbon, CO2 is released.
That CO2 insights precisely is one of the greenhouse effect gases and insights in the global warming. So I'm not going to take too long to tell you on the strategy. Well, I believe I'm going to go forward and I will tell you, but I would like to tell you that this is a strategy that was thought along a line of a lot of legal imagination and also appealing to a global discourse, not only on global climate change, but also to protect the future generations. So this law 4360 in Colombia, or the ruling, considers that there are rights towards the future generations. If you read the third article of Law 99, talks about sustainable development, it says that the rights of the future generations cannot be endangered. The right to enjoy a healthy environment. The discourse of sustainable development is focused on future generations. The Justicia made an investigation in this regard. I wasn't here, the director was Cesar Rodriguez then, and they found that it was very interesting to focus in this population group of children and adolescents, and you see them here in the picture. They are the actionants in the case, or the parties in the case. And why these children? Because the effect of climate change that is affecting us today, at that moment, it was 2017, there was the discourse being empowered, but it was not as strong as today. But at that moment, there was a lot of awareness on how this was going to impact on their lives. The climate change, that when they became adults, an average was going to be increases 1 and 1.5 and 1.7 Celsius when they became adults. And many of these young people and children lived in the coastal zones or high risk zones because of climate change matters, and their fundamental rights to life, to health, to housing and food were going to be strongly affected. So it is interesting here to see this action focus on a group that, although it's being focused on individual people, these children and adolescents, really it is impacting the whole globe. It's like a general agency of the future generations, at least Colombian ones. It is difficult to erase that boundary, but jurisprudence in climate change was very short, or very scarce. If you see, probably there was one 6382 of 2018, and they said, yes, the rights of the future generations are subject to interpretation by the Supreme Court, goes beyond and recognizes the fundamental rights of those future generations. So it orders mainly 5 measures: to have a national action plan headed by the Environmental Ministry, to have an intergenerational plan for the protection of the Colombian Amazon, for the municipalities to adopt in their territorial ordering plans measures to control deforestation, but also to adopt the municipalities' specific action plans, those who are in the Amazons, of course, that the autonomous corporations to adopt action plans, and on a 5th order, which have different anti-deforestation actions that are of an immediate nature. All those other orders took time to make progress. They have taken so long that even today, they have not been fulfilled. The autonomous environmental corporations have action plans, but to date, in the legal process, and here I'm going to tell you, the indicators have been established to assess precisely the progress of all these orders 5 years later. So it has been a slow process because it's a structural ruling. It is a complex one. Please let me know when I'm 3 minutes before my time. And this process has not been far from strong problems derived of how complex the strategy is. It happens that it came from a structural ruling. So the coordination of so many entities, public entities, has been a problem. At so many public policy focus, because it comes the rural one, the environmental one, the defense one on natural resources, and that has generated different perspectives within what it is known and as the follow-up board. The role of the justicia is the role has been an elaboration of the strategy, as I told you, identifies first the problem, the actors. At that moment, there were no groups, Colombian groups, that would seek to have activism on climate change. So we began to look for those who could be interested in the topic, what sort of action, because in theory, it seemed to be a class action suit, but the decision was to have a personal action because there are fundamental rights in play of these children and adolescents. And, well, this, the summons were done, and particularly the accompaniment of this group of very young people to inform them, to get to know what were the risks that they were being subject to, and that they were subject to on climate change and the effects that it was going to have in the Colombian territory, and particularly their places of origin, and fundamentally then a legal counseling to be with them along the whole process. The first instance, excuse me, this didn't have the review impugnation in the Supreme Court of Justice. After that, we have been on the follow-up of this part. Before that, we have to say there was a moment in which there was not a lot of movement. And together with Mauricio, with the clinic of the environment and public interest and CSJ, we elaborated a report starting on hearings, a very big hearing that took place by the follow-up tribunal to design a more follow-up strategy. Currently, as I told you, we are in the process of the elaboration. And as a matter of fact, yesterday we have the public hearing on the adoption of indicators precisely to assess the behavior of the public entities and to see how the results are going to be measured in terms of deforestation. We have to take into account or consider that it is not having the phenomenon, but the phenomenon moves in the territory, grows, diminishes. It would seem as though it's going well, but there is not enough data. Data is difficult to contrast because the reduction is slow, because the growth of the forest is slow. So it is clear the money invested in the different projects. So how many hectares this means that are not being deforested any longer. So all that is a matter of subject to observation within the indicators, also the matter of participation, but also there are lessons learned in this process, which is we didn't include the indigenous communities from the onset. For instance, a territory that is eminently indigenous in Colombia, which is better to have. My time is over. Well, having groups is very important, especially when they are so young. There is not much clear on the activism of the direction that their life wants to take, and the commitment in a structural ruling could be 10, 20, we don't know how many years from this. The ruling 0225 of 1994 is the ideal example, has not been closed yet, for instance. So I believe that with this, I close my presentation. Thank you very much, Luis Felipe. Thank you, Laura. And we want to thank Mauricio, Lisa, Erica, James, and of course you for your interventions. Very framed, and what we have asked you in this initial intervention, I believe that is an open microphone, please. Close microphones. That is called the role of legal clinics in the environmental legal processes in this framework transforming deforestation in Colombia. Now we are going to go into the dialogue for everybody to be able to answer the questions, to pose some answers in some questions that have been formulated by some of the attendees and some others prepared by the project's team. I would like to begin with a question, a guiding question for all of you. Have you ever had negative reactions or pressure from the government or from different economic sectors or productive sectors because of the activities or the cases that the clinic represents? I don't know who would like to answer first. Would you, Lisa, want to begin? Okay, please go on.
Oh, okay, yes, I had this briefly covered in the slide, but the answer is yes, we have. We have had, as I said, sort of there's some constant pressure basically on the university and the dean of the law school, because many of the companies that we sue are headed by alumni of the university or the law school. And so they're not happy to see the environmental clinic be involved. That's more low-level pressure, and the university's been very supportive over the years. But in 1999, the business and industry went to the Louisiana Supreme Court to try to limit the extent to which students could work on these kind of cases, because of course that's why we're here. So if the students can't practice, then we would not have a reason to exist. And they basically got the rule changed. And so now students are limited to representing indigent individuals, people who are below the federal poverty line, well, below 200% of the federal poverty line. And so that's just required some adjustments on our part. And what we do now is, and certainly there are plenty of individuals that qualify, but you can imagine it would be, there aren't very many individuals who would want to go by themselves against powerful, powerful oil and gas people. So we like to have groups as clients too. And so the licensed attorneys, who the Supreme Court, of course, cannot tell who we can and can't represent. We represent the group, and then the student will represent an individual. So we adjusted as a result of that limitation, which was purely political. And then in 2010, they went to the legislature and tried to prevent us from doing many of the things we do, like we can't sue the state government, we can't sue the federal government. That happened at the same time as the BP oil spill, which some of you may know about. It was the same year that oil was spewing into the Gulf of Mexico. So it wasn't good timing for them to try to get a public interest law clinic shut down, and it failed. So yes, it's happened and it continues to happen.
Thank you very much, Professor Erica. Please go on. As also the teacher was saying, we have had pressure from different actors. For instance, from the authorities, well, not always, but in a very specific case that focuses for many years, the pressure is always exerted on the university. And in this case, directly approaching the dean and trying for the legal clinic to not to make messages or publications or the case, because definitely these cases, cannot be, they are public interest groups, they are not, they are class actions, so it is impossible to remove the case or retire it somehow, but somehow to limit the freedom of expression of the faculty. That is like saying that is not the language out of which that could be used by the faculty in terms of the authority, and that is clearly a pressure. In other cases, what has happened is that when our students faces hearings with litigant lawyers who are alumni or the teachers themselves, there is also a pressure. And the pressure also comes towards the university saying you shouldn't let students be able to practice or face a teacher or a faculty from the pretense of some lawyers that wouldn't want the students to acquire the same skills and to face them in a hearing. That has happened. And a case that I very well remember, not necessarily in this clinic, from another legal clinic in which I took part, which was even stronger, the pressure, because precisely it was a national lawsuit in a very complex case where the pressure came from the national government saying that we negotiate that this activity to be in the country, and directly the national government said, yes, you cannot discuss it because the national government said yes to this. I remember that then the matter of the universities to have a conflict also of interests that take place that allows me to tell about it. It is when universities do consultancy to authorities and companies, but I also have legal clinics groups such as this one, not so much the legal consultancy office, but also the legal clinics that discuss a certain model of development. So we discuss certain contracts or activities or also PPPs not in the clinic where I am currently, but in that previous experience, it was very severe what happened, because definitely what happens there is that the voice of the clinic is shut. Even if you can continue being on the litigation, the interest of the consultancy was more important. What has happened with the University of Medellin, and I have to say that, which I am very proud, that in spite of certain programs having the consultancy contracts, and there is even management of confidential information because of those programs, the legal clinic has never had limitations of freedom of expression or work. It is very strange that you are in a hearing or an institutional consultation venue and the authority said, well, it was the University of Medellin that chose this. And yes, it's university, diversity of opinions, freedom of expression. And here we can find all the interests, and that's what makes us university, universal. And that question is very, very important that you pose. Thank you very much to you. Professor Mauricio had also raised his hand. Yes, sir. Yes, complementing a little bit and just like an advertising, if you allowed me, we have gotten that knowledge and we have worked together, and I learned from there a lot, like put into context that we come from the same line and thread on what she was mentioning. From 2.5 years ago, I've been directing the environment and public health clinic in the University of Los Andes, and we have had 3 very complex cases: prohibition of fracking, Santurban moorlands, and the use of mercury in the Amazon. Those cases have been flagships, and we know that within the university itself, they have had consultancy regarding these mining and energy topics that have been there. They have never called me to say, don't deal with that, you cannot handle those cases, or they share information, or be careful with the social media. Never, not from the dean, not from the president. So this is admirable, I believe, and there is a pride there, and that motivates me to continue. However, in this matter of negative reactions, we have received pressure from the government, which is normal because of the exercise of our activities. And I would like to say something very important, starting on threading a negative reaction with our students and with their mental health and with their legal practice.
This is very important. We are right next to our students, and for them, that's the legal practice. So those are the big points. Number one, last year or 1.5 years ago, when there were threats and they murdered someone and they threatened a whole group of people that were part of our cases. And that alerted parents. You know that Colombia has the highest percentage of threats and murders, the highest rates in the world. That alerted the parents, just the call. I mean, there was, yeah. So the law faculty, in that, at that point in time, the dean, she created a protocol, she created a strategy so that students wouldn't feel threatened. And she assumed representation. Not a, no, she never stopped the case. She has a strategy, she creates a protocol because there is systemic violence, because those that defend in Colombia. One thing. The other thing, I was not directing the clinic. There was this negative, reaction. The clinic was about to close. It was the first year that it was open, and we have public health, you know, so environment and the last name is public health, right? So there was inconstitutionality because of a law that prohibited donating fetuses tissue. So the standard prohibited this, then then we overturned that, and the court said, yes, we need to allow these types of donations. So the student came out and they made the declaration, and there was bullying by so many religious groups. You cannot imagine. Campaigns, they even went to the student's house, to her house with all this, I don't know, all these people. So protocols were created. Those two experiences, murders and threats in those groups were part of, and these tissues and those difficult cases, how we are going to manage negative adverse situations even more with our students. So that'd be all. Thanks. Thank you so much, Mauricio. I don't know, James, would you like to tell us about pressures that you've had in the framework of the activities at the clinic? Go ahead.
I'd be happy to. We are very fortunate at our law school out in Portland, Oregon, that we have not experienced too much pressure. I think there's a couple of reasons there. One is Lewis and Clark Law School is a private law school, and we don't receive any funding from the state of Oregon or any other governmental entity. So they don't have any influence over our budget. I'm aware that there have been several public law school environmental clinics in the United States that have been shut down by their state legislatures because they perceived that the work that the clinic was doing was not benefiting their constituencies or undercutting some of the economic interests that were more powerful at the time. Here, we don't get any funding from the state of Oregon, so they don't have that sort of influence over us. We're also very fortunate here in the Pacific Northwest, where our politics tend to be fairly progressive, and the public at large has a strong environmental understanding. And more often than not, we have broad public support over the cases that we bring, even when the cases are aggressive, even when they're challenging big economic interests that are also polluters or government agencies, et cetera. So it is less of a factor for us than it is for many other law schools in the country. I'm grateful for that.
Thank you. You're very fortunate. Well, I'd like to ask Laura, how does the Justicia integrate with legal clinics in law faculties in those processes you conduct? How do you dialogue with those clinics? I mean, is there a dialogue? yes, dialogue is key. I believe that the justicia, like I said before, one of the strong lines is advocacy. And the academia is key within those networks because the justicia conducts an academic exercise as well. These legal clinics replicate or they have the same model like the one that we have at the justicia. There is a research and there is activism as well. And activism in public interest topics, and particularly with the clinic, we work so close with environmental issues. So like all the agendas cross and with several universities in the country. We also work very closely. There is no doubt that those networks and that work, alliances, strategic alliances, those are the ones that strengthen these processes to defend the territory, these very complex topics to be handled only by a community, for example. They are highly vulnerable. So networks allow not only qualifying information but strengthening the progress along with I don't know, safeguarding those processes where more threats could arise. There are many risks related to judicial activism, particularly speaking about environmental issues and public health, like I heard from Mauricio, and human rights in general terms. So yes, for the justicia, this work is key. Working together with clinics, and it's been key to get support in follow-up as well. Thank you so much, Laura. We have some questions we'd like to integrate here to the discussion. We say hello to Eduardo. He has asked some questions, Guillermo Fajardo as well. Lisa, there is a question for you. Is it easy to access scientific evidence in the United States? Who assumes the cost for having this type of evidence?
So we have not had trouble getting a hold of the scientific evidence that supports a proposal by an industry or an agency. We have pretty robust public records laws here in the state, and also the Freedom of Information Act is, on the federal level. So we haven't had a lot of trouble getting things that the other side uses to support. But as far as our own studies, it's hard, not so much from an economic standpoint, although, if we want to do a study that contradicts a study offered by the government or the permittee or the industry, we're going to be the ones to pay for it. Generally, we have enough money to do that, but the problem is really a timing issue, because often we only have 30 days to respond to a very complicated permit application or draft permit. And so to get an expert and plug them in and turn around an expert report in 30 days is really challenging. So that's really the problem, is in terms of access, we've got experts, although frankly, it actually is often hard for us to find experts in a certain field. We always joke that there's this one man who everyone uses, like not only in Louisiana, but the whole region, that does air modeling work. And so the poor man is constantly overloaded because a lot of experts don't want to work for public interest environmental groups because they don't have enough regular business and money that they would then never be hired by the other side. So it's challenging, but generally, we found ways to make it work.
Thank you. I believe probably James, you could also answer this question that was
Sure.
asked to Lisa.
Sure. And what I might do is expand it a little bit just to talk about funding for the work that we do. In some of our cases, we do hire experts, just as Lisa was describing, to help prepare the evidence for our case. We are really fortunate in the United States. Many of our federal environmental laws have fee shifting provisions in them, such that if we bring a lawsuit under the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, for example, and we win that lawsuit, we are entitled to recover not only our legal fees, but also our expert witness and other costs of the litigation at the end of the lawsuit. And it's the polluter who pays us for that time and that effort. And that is a critical way for how we at our clinic fund our work, including recovering the expenses that we have to pay out to cover expert witnesses. One other point I'd like to make is that a big portion of our work here at our clinic at Earthrise involves litigation against the United States government or various agencies of the government. And those lawsuits are typically, you don't have an opportunity to introduce a lot of evidence that goes beyond an administrative record. So you're often confined to the documents that the federal agency produces to you, and that forms kind of the evidentiary basis for the court's decision. Yeah, so happy to go into any more detail on any of that if anyone has questions.
Thank you very much. Carl has asked a question. He says, I'm curious. I'm going to read it in Spanish. It's in the chat. Have any of the clinics represented non-human clients, whether individual animals or more broadly ecosystems? If so, how did that work? If not, is there a particular reason you have not represented a non-human client? We could start by Erica, Mauricio, maybe? I can answer that question for Carl. I mean, the question is in the chat. Well, in Colombia, there is this possibility of having legal actions to protect an ecosystem, right? To protect an ecosystem, like I said. In such a case, I could tell you that most cases of these actions that we've had in our clinic, so for example, a micro basin. That's one of the cases that we usually go with, is to protect micro basins and for legal obligations to be complied with those environmental authorities they have. And with this, their protection. So in Colombia, the possibility to exert these types of legal measures to protect ecosystems, to protect certain environmental assets or environmental services is possible. I don't know if probably the question was directed more towards the new actions in the country to protect, for example, ecosystems that are declared as subject of rights, or maybe talking about a protected area that could be declared as such, and finding that the declaration as a subject of rights that has been used as a mechanism as different actions, finding that that declaration is effective so that the litigation path to be able to get to the protection. So I don't know, probably Mauricio, could you talk about that? The legal clinic in Medellin has not used those legal protection measures in that sense, but traditionally it has done in popular actions. Thank you. Go ahead, Mauricio. Yes, just like Professor Castro said, we have not used these legal protection measures to request acknowledgement or ecosystems or animals as subjects of rights. However, We are part of the advisory committee and experts panels to follow up Atrato River ruling. Atrato River was declared as a subject of rights. What's interesting there is that theoretical line that has emerged with these subjects of rights. So they are biocultural rights. So there is relationship between these African descendant communities with the government. So there has been this very interesting aspect. We know that it hasn't been complied with. I mean, it's about to be published. I don't even think it has been published after 4 years. I'm talking about the decontamination plan for this river. I'm talking about that it has not been published. Well, it'd be great to listen to a case, and we're asking the government to do something about Pablo Escobar hippopotamus. He used to be a drug dealer, right? They have called us from many places and they said, what do we do with the hippos? What do we do with the hippos? So we need that type of mediation. I love mediation. I mean, I think it's phenomenal. Animalists have called me, hey, don't touch the hippos. Then technicals have said, we have to kill them. And oh, it's been so interesting. I'm right in the middle. And our action is saying, government with scientific base, you need to act and adapting. Well, I question this and I put it on the table. I don't see a lot of bioculturality and I don't see the cultural relationship that we can have from a hippopotamus in Colombia versus the river or versus other endemic species in Colombia that we can actually talk about traditions linked to them. So there is this interesting debate. We're working a little bit on that.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much.
Bueno, hay una pregunta para
There is
Laura,
this question for Laura.
la hace Guillermo Fajardo.
Guillermo
Pregunta,
Fajardo
¿cuál ha
asks,
sido el cumplimiento de la sentencia
let's talk about
4560 del
sentence
2018,
4660 from 2018.
¿Cuánto se ha
Has it been
avanzado?
complied
¿Cuáles
with?
son los beneficios
How much
tangibles
progress
y
has
directos
there
para
been?
las
What are the
comunidades de la
tangible
Amazonía
benefits
colombiana?
to the communities in the Colombian Amazon? Like I told you, not much progress. It's not that nothing has been done, but it's not what it was expected 5 years later. So deforestation reports don't show substantial progress in deforestation rates reduction. And there are many phenomena, illegal economies that feed the phenomenon. So it is very complex to control. This is not a specific factor like food or wood or use. There are many illegal economies or illegal cattle. So the phenomenon is a lot deeper than it seems. And besides that, we have this historical, socioeconomical inequality in the region. So this population is very susceptible to these types of economies. This population has historically been not visible, right? Invisible. So indigenous communities are out of the ruling. So what happens with the peasants that have inhabited there for decades? They have been products of migrations because of other violence processes. And somehow the state has acknowledged some type of stability in the legal situation in those territories, but nowadays they are they are so uncertain. There are concerns because of measures such as Artemisa operation. That operation was questioned because of the lack of human rights approach with those communities. So with specific benefits for populations, one could say yes and say that there is this big investment for reconversion of their productive methods. On the other hand, we have this big problem in relation to communities that have inhabited these areas, especially for peasants.
Thank you very much, Laura. We are reaching the end of this venue. I would like to make you a closing question. If the clinic that you lead, out of which you are part, is linked to some sort of clinic network or some litigation, strategic litigation network or high impact litigation. How do you do networking, or how do you learn from other law school clinics, or is there a multi-dialogue among clinics to strengthen the work that you do from the legal clinics? Who would like to begin to answer this closing question? Yes. On the matter of legal clinics, the clinics have created different types of networks. There are networks inside the country, but there is a very strong Latin American network, the Alliance of Social Justice. But in the country, the national network is created as an example of the Latin American network, which began in the 1990s. And then Colombia is part at the end of 1999, at the beginning of 2000 of this network. And on 2009, the National Colombian Legal Clinics is created. The idea is to have pedagogical encounters to strengthen the clinical teaching through the training of faculty, but also presenting cases and collaboration in those cases. Particularly, what we have done along the years is that thanks to the Colombian network and even the Latin American one, the cases could be supported from different strategies. So it could be that several clinics work together from the onset of a case, or it could be that a legal clinic has a case and as a collaboration asks other clinics to support on their strategy. For instance, in the matter on evidence, or when it is required, I don't know, special work that another clinic would be stronger because of their investigation, so that or research, so that clinic could support a point to strengthen pretensions or to go to a hearing, like in class suits to or class action suits, to have interesting agreements. We work a lot in a network. I would say that is one of the key issues on the clinical teaching in the country. Especially, I could tell you also about the experience that we have had in Medellin, because as I was telling you, the legal clinic of the university ends up being the origin of the university legal clinic that were created after 2004 in the city. So by us getting to know all of us, being the children of the same house, we support cases. So that is important. That has brought some cases to end up being successful. In a class action, for instance, that we worked, all the clinics took part of it. So there were 7 legal clinics litigating one case in the city that we knew it was very complex. And definitely, if we didn't have the support of the 7 clinics working together, it would have been very difficult to achieve the results. So there are methodologies for this. In an attempt to make this work systematic, we created a sort of methodology and group work to be able to have those collaborations and to have very clear what the purposes would be to look for or to seek collaboration. Thank you very much. That is what I could say. Thank you very much, Erica. Well, in the United States context, I don't know, Lisa or James, if you could tell us if you belong to any network or if you work together with other clinics.
I'd be happy to go first. I would say our networking amongst clinics tends to be informal. I know the clinic directors, like my bosses at Earthrise and probably Lisa as well, do get together for conferences every now and then. We have also our clinic and even the broader public interest environmental legal movement in the United States kind of grew in an earlier pre-technology era. And so many of the tools we still use for networking are a little bit old fashioned at this point, like attending conferences or sharing information via email listservs. One of the nice things about being at Lewis and Clark Law School, which has a very old and well-established environmental law program, is that we have alumni in dozens, if not hundreds, of public interest environmental organizations around the country. And I have the privilege of representing nonprofit organizations. And very, very often I'll have former students or other Lewis and Clark Law School alumni working on me with cases. And I know that most organizations in the Pacific Northwest, at least if I want to pick up the phone and talk to somebody about a potential case, there's a good chance I can talk to one of a Lewis and Clark alum. But it's still a pretty small network. So we tend to know each other, at least informally, at least by reputation. And it's also worth saying too, in the United States, there's a number of, outside of the university context, there's a number of large, well-established and well-funded public interest environmental legal nonprofit organizations. Groups like Earth Justice, for example, or the Southern Environmental Law Center, which do similar work and help to maintain those relationships and kind of spread the work that we do off of the universities and out into the bigger world, so to speak.
Well, thank you very much. We are going to continue. We are going to go to the final part of this. I believe, Lisa, you wanted to say something. Your microphone is on.
I didn't have much to add. I just wanted to mention basically, what James said is correct. Our environmental law clinic is part of a group of a lot of the environmental law clinics that the directors try to get together about once a year and talk about issues. And we have pedagogical, national meetings, but the Association of American Law Schools. But one collaboration that we were involved in for about 10 years was a collaboration of environmental public interest legal firms, like James mentioned, environmental law clinics, and environmental organizations along the Mississippi River, which runs from Minnesota all the way down to here in Louisiana, that was formed to tackle the dead zone, which is an area in the Gulf of Mexico that has extremely low dissolved oxygen. And because the problem is caused really by agricultural runoff in the northern states, it was not a problem that could be solved or fixed by one group in one state. So we formed a collaboration that was funded by a foundation. And that was, we learned a lot from that. The dead zone, unfortunately, still exists. We did not defeat the dead zone, but it was good work, and it was really useful to be able to share notes from that wider group.
Well, thank you very much to all of you for your interventions. Now we are going to go to the closing part. I would like to tell you, of course, as like a personal note and also institutional note, other strategies of environmental law teaching that we have identified for the analysis of conflict, not having a legal clinic proper, but getting the students close and delivering tools for the identification of these conflicts, and to be able to provide some tools when making decisions in some difficult cases. From the Externado University, we have two strategies. One of them is incubator to identify environmental conflicts in the country, of course, with a legal perspective, of course, and also looking for several objectives. First, with undergraduate students, to bring them close to these topics, to foster research skills, helping them and giving them tools for the identification of conflicts with a critical analysis, and of course allowing those students to be visible with their first publishings we have a methodology of work comprised of 2 or 3 stages: an academy stage, you see some students, then research stage in which they choose an environmental conflict. At the end, I'm going to share some of the links where you can find documents of conflict characterization, and also a practical stage, not of a legal intervention or administrative, but it is like the practice of building the input for those decision makers and the actors in the different conflicts. The results that we have had, well, 2 documents on characterization. I will share them to those who want to see them or read them. And a second strategy that we have looked for to promote in the external university, not with pre-grade and also, but with graduate students through an observatory that we have called Environmental Law Observatory, a venue coordinated by several faculty investigators that get together once a month, in which we dialogue and discuss about the new things on environmental law. And the main strategy from this observatory is to be able to identify those new standards or regulations in public policy and also individual matters within this project of legal skill strengthening. So it is an important tool for the decision makers to be curing these new things in the legal environment, which is a new branch, which is in constant updating, and therefore there are challenges that are very important. The most important objectives of this observatory have been, first, create an academic venue outside of the classroom to be able to dialogue without any sort of methodology, but simply an open venue for dialogue to discuss the regulatory efficacy of many of the provisions on national and international environmental law and the efficacy of the internal law. And secondly, it is an external, not internal objective to be able to offer the community simple, reliable information and to be updated on the news on environmental law. We also have a working technology, first a discussion stage in which we discuss around environmental issues related to the environmental law. We invite sometimes some experts or some officers that do have for them to present, and that mini discussion by the students. Then a second stage, an individual stage for each one of the students of research, of identifying those new things in jurisprudence, regulations, public policy, also doctrine, to then present our periodical results that they are materialized by means of a sort of bulletin that we issue every month through our webpage that I'm also going to share with you. And there you can find the analysis made by our students as an observatory on new regulation, new jurisprudence, and public policy that are additional tools that complement, of course, that such an important work by the legal clinics in our country and in the global area that, and this, as we see that in this dialogue that we have propitiated today. With this, we conclude this webinar, the role of the legal clinics in legal proceedings. Thanking you, of course, thanking all our panelists for their participation and all the attendees. We want to invite you to participate on the last webinar that we'll have next Thursday, which will approach the process aspects of the environmental justice. I don't know if Carol would like to close.
Just to say, this was really rich, and I wish we had more time. I feel like there's a lot of experience and learning here, and I wonder, particularly Lisa and Jamie, if you're comfortable, could we, if people are interested in reaching out to you, is it okay to share emails?
Absolutely.
Sure.
Excellent, because I think like Lisa, you mentioned people, the law clinics meeting up at the American Association of Law Schools annual meeting. There might be people who would be interested in taking advantage of that opportunity. So thank you all very much for taking the time, and wish you all well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a nice evening.